Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind tore across the open plain like it was trying to erase everything in its path, and by the time Clara Granger saw the smoke, it was already too late. The fire had eaten through the roof of the homestead, blackening the sky above what used to be her life. The barn was gone. The house collapsed in on itself, still hissing where the snowmelt hit hot ash. Clara stood frozen in the mud, her black skirts soaked to the knees, her arms limp at her sides. The wagon behind her creaked under the weight of what little she had salvaged from the town's outskirts, mostly flour. A cracked washbasin, 2 patched quilts. None of it mattered now. She had been gone only 2 days. Just 2. Her husband's grave was still fresh in the cemetery back in Fort Washakie. The cholera took him fast and cruel. And now this. She stepped forward on shaking legs. Her boots sank deep. The land didn't care. It never had. "Ma!" The voice was small, hoarse. Clara turned fast. Her son, Reeves, had climbed down from the wagon, his younger sister, Rosie, on his heels. Rosie's thumb was in her mouth, eyes wide and unsure. Reeves, all of 10, tried to hide how scared he was by standing between the wagon and the ruin, jaw locked like his father's used to be when the weather turned bad. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Reeves didn't answer. Rosie clutched his hand. It was over. Everything they had built, everything she tried to hold onto after Daniel's death, it was gone. Burned to nothing. She dropped to her knees in the wet earth and pulled both children into her arms. The wind howled above them. Her fingers clenched around her children like she could keep them safe just by holding on tight enough. But she had no food, no roof, no neighbors for miles. The nearest town was 3 days south. She had no horse left, only a mule too old to pull much more than the wagon. And the winter wasn't done with them yet. She had no plan, no hope, but she had to move. They traveled east. Not because she knew what was there, but because the sky looked a little clearer that way. She kept the children wrapped in blankets, rationed what little water they had, and prayed with every step that someone would meet them before the snow did. By the second night, Clara could no longer feel her hands. Rosie shivered even wrapped in both quilts. Reeves didn't speak much. He just watched her with that wide, silent look that made her feel like she was failing him more every hour. She fell asleep sitting upright, back against the wheel. A branch snapped nearby. She jolted awake, reaching for the small knife she kept tucked in her boot. A figure stood a few paces off, not moving. Cloaked in furs, bough slung across his back. Clara's heart seized. He stepped forward slowly, hands open. "I will not harm you," he said. His voice was low, calm. She didn't lower the knife. "My name is Delsin," he said. "You should not be out here." Clara swallowed hard. We lost our home." Delsin looked past her to the children, then back to her face. "You need shelter." She didn't nod, didn't speak, but her grip on the knife loosened. He turned and walked into the trees. Clara hesitated, then gathered Rosie in her arms and motioned for Reeves to follow. They walked for at least a mile, maybe more. When the woods opened again, there was a narrow stream, and beyond it, a small lodge built low to the ground, smoke rising from its chimney. Delsin stepped aside and motioned toward it. Inside, warmth, the smell of cooked meat, blankets. Clara sat by the fire, her fingers thawing. Rosie curled beside her. Reeves watched Delsin with cautious eyes from a corner. "You live here alone?" Clara asked, voice hoarse. Delsin nodded. "For now." He didn't say more. He offered food, water, a safe place to rest. Clara didn't sleep that night. She listened to every sound, every creak of the lodge wall, every breath her children took. But nothing happened. And the next morning, Delsin brought in more firewood and boiled water for tea. "You do not have to leave yet," he said without looking at her. "I do not want to burden you," Clara replied. "You are not." Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then finally asked, "Are you a warrior?" Delsin's eyes met his. "I was. I am a hunter now." "Will you teach me?" Clara's breath caught. Reeves, but Delsin gave a small nod. "Yes." And just like that, something shifted. The days passed slow but warmer. Delsin never asked questions. He taught Reeves how to track rabbits. He carved Rosie a small wooden bird, and her laughter filled the lodge for the first time in weeks. Clara watched him, quietly. She had not known kindness like this since Daniel. One evening, while the children slept, she stepped outside where Delsin was skinning a hare. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know. Why did you?" He looked up at her. "Because I saw a woman in the snow who had not given up. Even when everything else was gone." Clara felt something catch in her chest. She looked down. Her hands trembled. "You saved us," she whispered. Delsin stood. "You saved them." He touched her hand only for a moment. But it was enough. Enough to make the storm inside her chest quiet. Just a little. She did not pull away. The thaw came in slow breaths. Snow pulled back from the tree roots first, then from the narrow footpaths Delsin used to check his snares. By the time the creek began to run clear again, Clara had begun mending a torn sleeve with thread Delsin traded for at Wind River Station, her hands steadier than they'd been in months. She stitched by the fire while Rosie sat nearby, arranging river stones in careful lines. Reeves hadn't returned yet from checking the traps with Delsin, and her needle paused every so often as she glanced toward the door. When the latch finally lifted, Wind followed them in. Delsin entered first, boots wet, and Reeves behind him, carrying a pair of grouse, feathers still ruffled from the cold. "I found them," Reeves said, holding the birds out with pride. Delsin nodded once. "He spotted the tracks before I did." Clara met her son's eyes. "You did well." Reeves beamed, then quickly looked down and busied himself with hanging the birds just inside the door. Delsin began unstringing his bow, and Clara returned to her stitching. The only sounds were Rosie humming softly and the soft flicker of the fire. Later, after the children were asleep, Clara stepped outside to shake out the quilt she'd finished mending. The moon was low, casting long shadows between the lodge and the tree line. Delsin was there already, sitting on a felled log, sharpening a blade with quiet rhythm. She hesitated, then crossed to him. He didn't look up, but his voice was calm. "You sleep less than you used to. The quiet makes it harder." She folded the quilt over her arms. "There's too much room for remembering." He set the blade aside and met her eyes. "Memory is not always something we choose." "No," she said, "but it doesn't ask permission either." Delsin watched the trees for a while before he spoke again. "My brother and I used to trap along the Sweetwater. He was older, thought himself invincible." She waited. "One spring he went farther upriver alone. Wanted to prove something. He didn't return." Clara felt the wind tug at her braid. "I'm sorry. I buried what I could find." She stepped closer, the quilt still in her arms. "I didn't know you had family." "I don't anymore." The silence stretched. Not heavy, not light, just there like the mountains waiting beyond the hills. She sat beside him. The log was cold beneath her dress, but she didn't mind. "I keep seeing the fire," she said. "The house. I still wait to hear Daniel's boots on the porch." Delsin didn't speak, but his presence was steady beside her. "I thought if I kept going, worked hard enough, I could hold it all together." She folded her hands over the quilt. "But it slipped through anyway. You did not fail." She didn't move. "I didn't save what mattered." Delsin turned to her. "You brought your children through the worst season. That is not nothing." The wind whispered through the trees, and Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "You're kind to them," she said. "To me." He didn't answer right away. The blade lay forgotten at his feet. "I see you," he said finally. "Not just a woman left behind. I see your strength." She opened her eyes. The cold no longer pressed so deep. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "I do not either." They sat that way until the moon climbed higher, and the lodge behind them held the steady breath of sleeping children. When she rose, she left the quilt across his lap. He didn't stop her, but his gaze followed her until the door closed behind her. Reeves stood barefoot in the shallows, trousers rolled to the knees, his fingers cupped around a silver flash darting through the water. Clara watched from the bank, mending a worn hem with a length of sinew thread Delsin had traded for that morning. Rosie sat in the grass beside her, combing dry blades into braided rows. Delsin had gone upstream to check the fish where they'd built together during the last full moon. He'd shown Reeves how to place willow branches into a V that funneled into a basket trap. Clara hadn't asked where he'd learned the method, only listened as he explained it in Lakota to Reeves. Then again in careful English. Clara tied off the hem and set the dress aside. The sun was climbing high, warm on her shoulders. She turned to Rosie. "Do you remember the song your grandmother used to sing about the fox and the winter tree?" Rosie shook her head, curls sticking to her cheeks. Clara hummed the first line. Rosie's brow furrowed. "Was it the one where the fox falls asleep in the snow and dreams of spring?" Clara smiled. "That's the one." She started singing softly, her voice low and steady. Rosie leaned against her shoulder. The song ended just as Delsin returned, fish traps slung over one shoulder, water glistening at the hem of his leggings. He set the trap down beside the fire pit and knelt to untie the bindings. Reeves came running up behind him, breathless. "There was a doe across the creek," he said. "I didn't move, just like you showed me." Delsin looked up. "She saw you?" "No. She stepped right past me." Reeves's chest swelled. "You were learning the way of quiet." Clara stood and brushed her hands on her apron. "Found anything besides fish?" "Tracks. A black bear sow with a cub. Further west." Clara's gaze flicked to the trees. "Will she come near?" "Not if we keep our food sealed." He glanced toward the smokehouse frame they'd started building last week. "I'll finish the walls tomorrow." Rosie tugged at Clara's skirt. "Can I help with the roof?" Delsin crouched beside her. "Only if you promise not to climb it." "I promise. Unless there's birds." Clara laughed, surprised by the sound of it. Delsin's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, not amusement, not quite affection. Something steadier. That night, she woke to the sound of wind stirring the pine boughs. She wrapped a shawl over her nightdress and stepped outside, drawn by the hush. Delsin was seated near the embers, a blanket draped over his shoulders, eyes on the stars. She approached quietly. "Can't sleep. They speak tonight." She followed his gaze upward. "The stars." He nodded. "My grandfather used to say the sky tells stories." "You have to be still enough to hear." "What do they say tonight?" "That the season is turning. The bear will wake soon and the earth will soften." She sat beside him, her hands in her lap. "I used to think spring meant safety. But last spring, everything came apart. You were not meant to carry it alone." She looked at him, the firelight deepening the lines at the corners of his eyes. "I didn't think I had another path." "You do now." She hesitated. "Why are you still here, Delsin?" His voice came quiet but certain. "Because your presence steadies me. And because I want to build something that does not vanish with fire or snow." Clara turned her face toward the flames. "I don't know how to start again." "You already have." He reached for her hand. Not to pull her closer, not to claim but to offer. She placed her fingers in his, and the silence between them no longer felt empty. Inside, the children slept without stirring. Outside, the stars wheeled over the pines, and Clara closed her eyes against the wind and let herself rest in the space Delsin made beside her. The first thunder of the year came low and distant, like a memory returning from far off. Clara stood beneath the eaves of the smokehouse while Delsin fastened the final plank into place. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the wind had changed, carrying the scent of wet stone and wild sage. Reeves was gathering kindling near the lodge. Rosie perched on a flat rock with a scrap of charcoal in her hand, drawing quiet shapes across her palm. They'd eaten well the last 2 nights, trout roasted in the coals and the dried root Delsin had named, but Clara could never quite pronounce. Her body felt steadier now, less brittle. Her hands didn't shake when she woke. "Storm'll pass quick," Delsin said, setting the hammer aside. Clara nodded. "The air feels thick, like it's waiting." He stepped down from the scaffolding, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. Some storms are only meant to test the ground. Clara brushed her palms against her skirt. I used to fear them, the noise, the break of sky. But now, I don't know. It feels honest. He looked at her a long moment, then nodded once, as if something unspoken had settled between them. That evening, the rain came fast. Reeves and Rosie huddled beside the hearth while Clara stirred a pot of wild onion and barley. Delsin checked the seams of the lodge, pressing his palm to the hide wall where a trickle formed. He patched it with pitch and bark shavings while Clara ladled stew into wooden bowls. When the children were asleep, Clara stepped outside to pour out the wash water. The sky had cleared behind the storm, stars sharp above the dark ridge. Delsin leaned against the lodge's outer post, a piece of dry pine in one hand, carving knife in the other. His voice came low. I've been thinking of planting corn. Clara blinked. Here. There's a patch of open land past the creek. Not rich, but willing. She stepped closer. You've never mentioned farming before. I haven't needed to. She watched the curl of wood fall from the pine. Why now? He looked up. Because I want roots that don't have to run. Clara stood very still. I know the land, he continued. But I've never known it with someone beside me. Not like this. She folded her arms across her chest. I don't know what I could be to you, Delsin. I'm still mending at the seams. He set the carving down. You don't have to be anything but yourself. That is all I ever asked. You've given us more than I could repay. You already have. She met his eyes. What if I never stop carrying the weight of what I lost? He stepped forward. Then let me help carry it. Not to take it from you. Just to walk beside it. Clara's breath caught. She reached for his hand, fingers brushing across his knuckles. I thought I was finished. I thought I'd burned down with everything else. You didn't, he said. You came through. And now, he said, we build. He leaned in, not quickly, not demanding. Just a steady presence. When Clara met him halfway, it wasn't fire or thunder, it was warmth, slow and certain, like spring returning to deep earth. They stood like that for a long time, no need for words. Inside, the lodge was quiet. Outside, the air smelled of pine smoke and wet soil, and the stars held their place above the trees. Clara had lost everything. And yet, in the quiet strength of the man before her, she had found something greater than she'd ever dreamed, a life not rebuilt, but reborn. The ground softened underfoot as May settled in, and with it came a rhythm Clara hadn't known she missed. From the shallow plot beyond the creek, she pulled roots and turned soil with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her palms blistered but steady. Delsin worked beside her, silent but present, the two of them moving in tandem without the need for planning. What began as an idea corn, maybe beans, had become rows of furrows marked by smooth stones and willow stakes. Reeves had taken to carving, not with idle hands but with intent, shaping bow handles and arrow shafts under Delsin's guidance. Rosie, when not trailing the two of them, had begun collecting herbs, lemon balm, wild mint, and pressing them into folded bark pages Clara stitched together with thin strips of hide. One evening, while Reeves mended a broken snare and Rosie gathered wood shavings for the fire, Clara joined Delsin near the edge of the corn plot. He was tying ash branches into a low fence to keep out the mule deer. She leaned against a post, her hands still dusted with earth. You don't talk much about your people, she said. He tied off the last knot and straightened. Not many left to speak of. Her voice was quiet. Do you want to return to them? His eyes didn't shift. I've already chosen where I belong. Clara looked toward the rising green behind him, the slow growth of their labor. And if the world changes again the way it always seems to? He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing until his shadow touched hers. Then we change with it. But we don't leave. Her breath caught and she looked up at him. You said once you were a hunter. But you build like a farmer. I build like a man who's done wandering. That night, Clara lay beside him beneath a quilt of stitched hides, the children asleep across the room. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing red. She reached for his hand beneath the covers, not needing words. He curled his fingers around hers, and for the first time in years, she fell asleep without waking once. By midsummer, the corn was waist-high, and the smokehouse held strips of cured venison alongside dried berries Rosie had helped harvest. Their days passed in measured labor baskets woven, hides softened, stew thickened with whatever root or grain the land offered. The lodge had been expanded, its second room framed with pine Delsin and Reeves carried back from the ridge. Clara had lined the walls with woven rush mats to keep in warmth when fall came again. One morning, as the sun rose low over the treetops, Reeves ran to the lodge shouting for Clara. She stepped outside, apron still in hand. "It's there," he said, pointing past the corn. "The doe. With a fawn." Clara followed his gaze. In the early light, the animal stood still among the wildflowers, her fawn nestled beside her. Delsin joined them, his footsteps quiet. Reeves turned to him. "She came back. She remembers safety," Delsin said. "Like all things that survive." Clara felt the warmth of his words settle inside her. That afternoon, while Rosie napped in the shade, Clara sat with Delsin beneath the cottonwood tree near the creek. She held a letter in her lap, the paper creased and travel-worn. She had written it weeks before and sent it with a trader heading south. That morning the reply had come. "It's from my cousin Miriam," she said. "She's remarried, has a shop near Cheyenne. Says we're welcome to visit." Delsin didn't speak right away. "Do you want to go?" Clara turned the letter over in her hands. "I think I just needed to know someone remembered me." "That's enough." He nodded once, then reached for her hand. "You were remembered here." She smiled, brushing her thumb over his knuckles. "I know." Later, with the sun slipping west, Clara knelt beside a patch of wild rose bushes and began to cut stems for the table. Delsin joined her, carrying a bowl of fresh water. He set it beside her and crouched low. "I've been thinking," he said. She glanced at him. "Dangerous." He gave a soft breath of laughter. "If you mean to stay, and I mean to stay, maybe it's time we said it plain." Clara's hands stilled. "Said what?" "That this is our home. Together." The petals in her hands trembled slightly. She looked at him fully then, the curve of his jaw, the steadiness in his gaze. "You want to marry me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes. In the way that matters. You, me, the children. This land." She reached for his face, fingers brushing the ridge of his cheekbone. "Then take my hand. And don't let go." He did. And he didn't. That fall, they stood barefoot in the field where the corn had grown, Reeves holding a carved staff, Rosie tucked under Clara's shawl. No preacher, no paper. Just sky, earth, and vow. "I promise to walk with you," Clara said, her voice clear. "And I with you," Delsin answered. They sealed it with hands joined and foreheads touching, the wind threading through the trees, bearing witness. Years passed. The lodge became a house still humble, still rooted. Reeves grew into a tracker, then a guide, his hands calloused but skilled. Rosie learned to dye cloth with plants she foraged herself, and her laughter never once left the house empty. Clara kept the garden, tended the goats, taught her daughter to read by oil lamplight. She aged without fear. Delsin's hair silvered. His strength never left him. He still carved in the evenings, still watched the stars as if they were telling him something worth hearing. And every morning, before the sun rose, Clara would wake and reach across the bed. He was always there, warm and steady, just as he'd promised. They never left that place. They didn't need to. Together they weathered all seasons. And in the long years, nothing burned again.